Okay, folks, so welcome. My name is Anthony Reddy. I'm the director of the Oxford Centre for Religion and Culture. That's part of Regent's Park College, and in turn part of the University of Oxford. This is week 3 of our weekly seminar series that meets on a Monday at 5 o'clock. And our theme for this term is freedom of religion and belief. Our speaker this week is Kristina Arriaga.
Perfect.
Oh, actually, it occurred to me that I should check on the pronunciation, but anyway, I got it right. So, a scholar and internationally recognized advocate for particularly religious freedom. She has published dozens of editorial op-eds and book chapters on a wide range of topics related to this field. Her distinguished career includes heading a public interest law firm in the US that was devoted to defending the freedom of expression of all religious traditions, and being a member of the US delegation to the United Nations Human Rights Commission and the US delegation to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and the vice chair of the US Commission for International Religious Freedom. So clearly we have a very, very distinguished speaker in our midst, as all our speakers have been thus far and to come. So, Kristina, we are in your hands.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for the perfect pronunciation of my last name. Many times I get introduced as Kristina Aguilera. And I never correct people when they say that. So I think it's a good confusion to have. So thanks. Offering a cup of tea to a stranger is universally viewed as an act of charity and hospitality, except if you're Baha'i in Iran, where doing something like that can take you to prison, get you tortured, along with the person that is the recipient of the tea. The danger springs from a recent escalation of government-led propaganda meant to instigate hatred against the Baha'is, whose religion, established in the 19th century, emphasizes the spiritual unity of humanity. The campaign cast the Baha'is as disloyal to the regime, as agent for other countries, and most notably, as unclean. Being called unclean elicits feelings of disgust, and invoking feelings of disgust against a group of people who threaten the prevalent social order is a tried and true, powerful, and highly contagious way to discriminate. My presentation today will address why the origins of disgust make it such a powerful emotion, how disgust was co-opted to guide moral judgment, and how the disgust discourse can adversely affect freedom of religion or belief. So what are its origins? Even though the disgust discourses have been used for many decades, it's only been in the last 30 years that scholars among many disciplines have uncovered the mechanics of disgust and its adaptation. Studies suggest that disgust was a key emotion in human survival, reproduction, and function in the service of establishing order, both biological order to avoid entropy and societal order to avoid extinction. The term disgust comes from Latin, dis, negative or reversal, and gustus, taste. Current researchers in the field of disgust describe the core function of disgust as the revulsion of the oral incorporation of contaminants. Given how important eating is and the potential dangers of ingesting pathogens, it makes evolutionary sense why taste, the mouth, and oral incorporation would become priorities for our survival. Early humans were omnivores. How could they tell if there were pathogens present in any given food? They were forced to rely on inferential cues using all 5 senses. Suppose you came upon a dead animal. How could you know if the animal was safe to eat? Visual cues would help you determine how the animal had died, could have given you a clue as to whether the animal himself or herself had ingested something toxic. The presence of maggots or flies might have signaled the animal had been dead for too long to be safe to eat. If it smelled rotten, you may be able to determine that it was not a good thing to eat. And you might have touched it to see if it was still warm. The same inferential system was used to determine if fruits or vegetables were good to eat. We've all had the experience of going to get a fruit that was too mushy or slimy or moldy and immediately being revolted by it. Even our hearing was designed to determine whether something was safe to ingest. Think about a time you heard someone else get sick on an airplane, and that made you feel a little queasy. The safety mechanism existed, so when we had communal meals, if someone else got sick, we were alerted that the food was not safe. Our taste buds were also programmed to determine if something was safe to ingest. We've all had that moment in the morning where we took a sip of milk and immediately knew it had gone bad. Finally, if our taste buds could not detect pathogens, our system developed so we would get rid in the form of vomit. And I'm grossing you out on purpose for a reason. So we'll get to the good philosophical points in a moment. As an aside, the reason some of us suffer from motion sickness and experience nausea in airplanes or boats has to do with the fact that we were programmed to walk, not to fly, not to float. And when our perception systems misfire, our system thinks we have inherited, we have taken a toxin that's making our nervous system sense improperly our surroundings. We also know that disgust emerged so that we would reproduce. Some theories suggest that the survival of the species depended on finding the right mates, rejecting those who appeared ill or unhealthy. This would include kin, the very young, the very old, the sick, members of other species, and for many people, to this day, members of the same sex. This view is supported by multiple studies which posit that to survive, the early human had to establish cooperative groups, and intermarriage instead of intramarriage was vital to establishing collaboration and therefore social order. These marriages, it is argued, became group contracts, which also explain practices such as levirate, where a man marries the wife or wives of the deceased brother, or sororate, when a man marries the unwed sister of his deceased wife. This was all meant to establish cooperation among cultures. But we evolved, and according to the principles of adaptation, the disgust system was co-opted, so that by sensing and thinking that something was disgusting, a culture could communicate its disapproval and separate from the disgusting matter. In the two-way street between mind and body, as humans developed the ability to speak and reason, physical contamination became associated with spiritual contamination and vice versa. Disgust discourses have been found in every human culture and are remarkably similar. Objects that disgust us do not vary across cultures greatly. So what is the mechanism of disgust? Research suggests that there are three distinct yet interrelated aspects to disgust. These are the elicitor, the disgust response, which generates a sense of offensiveness or revulsion, and feelings of contamination, which result in distancing behavior for the object. A physiological example of an elicitor could be a cockroach, an insect that provokes a disgust response. Then the thinking process generates offensiveness and revulsion, which leads to thought of contamination. Contamination is the belief that when the elicitor touches another matter, the offensiveness is transmitted permanently. In an experiment, for instance, people refused to wear launder clothing when they were told that it once belonged to Adolf Hitler. In other experiments, people would not drink water if they were told a sterilized cockroach had been previously immersed in it. The rejection of the contaminated water was a distancing behavior. So when theocrats in Iran target Baha'is as unclean people whose tea may not be accepted, they engage in a disgust discourse meant to evoke Baha'is being treated as elicitors of disgust, people who can contaminate the tea by the mere act of touching the teacup, and by extension, the person that consumes the tea. And all of this is meant to provoke revulsion against an entire community. Regrettably, one can trace a similar disgust discourse as a precursor for violence against groups that have been targeted as elicitors of disgust. Just as the early human looked for inferential clues to figure out if something was safe to eat, the effective language of disgust evokes in us a sense of warning, a sense of danger against the people who are being targeted. In Rwanda in 1994, Hutu politicians called the Tutsis roaches. During a period of 100 days, members of the Tutsi minority ethnic group were massacred. It's estimated that as many as 800,000 people were killed over the course of 100 days. Throughout the Castro regime, the government called the Cubans who attempted to leave the island maggots or gusanos. Cuban supporters of the revolution used the term derogatorily against their own parents, family members, and friends, simply because of their ideological and political differences. During the Mariel boat lift in 1980, where 125,000 Cubans took to the waters to escape, people would throw rocks at them, yelling at them maggots, as they boarded one of the 1,400 ships that were docked in Mariel. In the summer of 2021, when Cubans took to the street to demand free elections, the government referred to the protesters as vulgar, indecent, and delinquent, eliciting the effective language of disgust against people who were only asking for free elections for the first time in 64 years. Therefore, disgust is not only triggered by an object, but a concern of what it is and what it has been. A cup of tea is not disgusting unless it has been touched by a Baha'i and permanently contaminated. This makes it clear that disgust also hinges on other notions like offensiveness. Biologically, research demonstrates that Americans reject certain foods for reasons beyond taste. They're prone not to eat chocolate candy if it's shaped like feces, or drink apple juice out of a sterile bedpan. Conversely, there's also a robust body of research that suggests a strong link between moral judgments and physical disgust. Studies show that participants are likely to engage in charity and reciprocity in a clean, scented room. The association between physical cleanliness and divine purity has been present in theological discourses, from instructions about what food to eat and to avoid in various theological traditions, to an American pastor in the 18th century who coined the term cleanliness is next to godliness. Conversely, atonement is also associated with disgust discourse. Experiment shows that participants who remember their own bad deeds or write about someone else's misdeeds or transgressions have a greater need to physically clean. In literature, this relationship is illustrated by Shakespeare, whose Lady Macbeth obsessively washes her hands in an attempt to relieve her guilty conscience. Other studies show visible links to olfactory disgust, that is, when participants were asked to judge moral vignettes, those who were exposed to bad smelling sprays were more likely to be harsher in their judgments. Physiologists have studied the overlap of physical interactions and neural interaction to discuss, even suggesting that experiences of bitter, sweet, and neutral have a marked effect on moral judgments. In short, studies strongly suggest that the disgust discourse extend well beyond our physical experience and physical survival, and permeate and guide our moral judgment and regulate as the way we regulate conduct. Research on disgust suggests that humans tend to deem the things that disgust us as being immoral. Scholars argue that disgust, more than any other emotion, has a special capability for facilitating a descriptive to normative swerve, for taking certain objects or behaviors that we evolved to detest, and not only warning us to avoid them, but also spotlighting them as focus for moral condemnation. To put it colloquially, certain laws, customs, and societal norms have followed a pattern of moral reasoning along the lines of what is gross to me is wrong for you. Some philosophers have argued that there's a certain wisdom to repugnance. Leon Kass, the American philosopher, thought that in an era of relativity, it would be important for us to pay attention to our feelings of disgust. Some people argue that it could prevent us from engaging in animal cruelty, committing incest, allowing unbridled medical experiments on human beings. However, there are scholars who argue that disgust is unreliable emotion because it holds such a powerful intuitive sway that it can serve to violate the most basic human rights. Martha Nussbaum, a scholar who has written extensively on disgust in the law, illustrates the danger. She says, throughout history, certain disgust properties, sliminess, bad smell, stickiness, decay, foulness, have repeatedly and monotonously been associated and projected onto Jews, women, homosexuals, untouchables, lower class people. I tend to agree with her. Aside from the examples previously cited, one can find that disgust not only has a powerful contaminant effect, but it has a long life. In the 19th century in the United States, for instance, a renowned physician posited that enslaved African Americans were diseased, had small brains, and a tendency towards barbarism. These theories and others gave way to scientific racism, which likened Blacks to animals that should be kept in a state of submission. As early as 1919, Hitler was already engaging in the disgust discourse, setting up the stage for the future of the extermination camps when he characterized the Jews as a race tuberculosis. In 2015, a sitting judge in Poland called Jews a despicable, filthy nation. In Iraq, where the population of Christians has been decimated, the Islamic State called the church in Baghdad a dirty den of idolatry, following a suicide bombing. In 2019, an Oklahoma congressional candidate posted a photo of a roadway sign that read Islam with the caption, "This is beyond disgusting." Disgust is not only a strong contaminant, disgust is not only intuitive, it always leads to action. The recent escalation of the demonization of Baha'is has been extremely effective. And last year, a Baha'i cemetery was desecrated with a graffiti that read, "Filthy infidels, we will kill you all." In closing, I'd like to leave you with this thought. Disgust is a strong moral intuition with a powerful ability to lead to thoughts of permanent contamination and depersonalization. But there's an antidote. It is an understudied phenomenon that moral psychologist Jonathan Haidt calls elevation. He says it's a surprising and beautiful fact that in our species, that each of us can be moved to tears by the sight of a stranger helping another stranger. It's even more beautiful that these feelings sometimes inspire us to change our behavior, values, and goals. Narratives of the lives of Jesus, Buddha, and Mother Teresa, and other inspiring figures are full of stories who, upon meeting the saintly figure, drop their former materialistic pursuits and devote themselves to advancing the mission of the one who elevated them. A hallmark of elevation, he suggests, is that, like disgust, elevation is contagious and is long-lasting. When an elevation story is told well, it elevates those who hear it. Powerful moments of elevation, whether experienced first and secondhand, sometimes push a mental reset button, wiping out feelings of cynicism and replacing them with feelings of hope, love, optimism, and a sense of moral inspiration. Elevation might be as key to our survival as disgust is. When people perform acts of kindness, they can support those around you. Take, for instance, the case of Roxana Saberi, an unjustly imprisoned American journalist who shared a prison cell in Tehran, a prison known for torture and solitary confinement, with two innocent Baha'i women, Mavash Saber and Fariba Kamal Abadi. Despite being held in prison, the Baha'i cellmates told Saberi, "We believe in love and compassion for humanity, even for those who wrong us." Upon her release, Saberi credited much of her strength in enduring her incarceration to her Baha'i cellmates. The survival of our religious freedom, or freedom of religion or belief, of our ability to live according to our deeply held convictions, or no convictions at all, is threatened whenever we allow the politics of disgust to prevail. Whether in Iran or in our backyard, dehumanizing others based on their beliefs erode our humanity universally and for generations to come. We must denounce and extinguish the politics of disgust employed anywhere, anytime. Thank you.